This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 28.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba. Ramsey's favorite chocolate bar is Bounty, some more Bounty, and a little bit more Bounty. Hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, SE Nation, and welcome to the latest episode of We the Sales Engineers. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for listening. Today, my conversation is with Wesley Toman, otherwise known as Wes. I met Wes a while back, and I met him for the purposes of trying to sell them something, because people tend to use our equipment to demo their own stuff. So that was the purpose of having lunch with Wes, and it quickly deviated from me trying to sell Wes anything to just having a conversation about being a sales engineer. And that was almost 3 years ago. And it was a fun conversation then. And I've been wanting to get him on the podcast for a while. And I was finally able to get him on. And we talked about a lot of interesting stuff, from mentoring to mistakes. So, and without further ado, let's just jump into the conversation. And hopefully we'll all learn something together. Hey, Wes, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. We're happy to be here.
I appreciate you being here. And so you and I go a little bit back. We've met a couple of times. We're kind of in the same domain. But for those who don't know how famous you are, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Wes Toman. I'm a system engineer at Cisco Systems. I have the distinguished opportunity to work with the Canadian federal government in Ottawa, Canada. And that means I get to do a fair bit of large system engineering. So I focus on large and complex solutions in Government of Canada's data center space and across Cisco's portfolio of products, which is something I enjoy, frankly, is focusing on a wide range of technologies and across projects that are more than one silo, and effectively they're projects that can be quite interesting. So working on the supercomputer that forecasts the weather, or maybe working on a system that does border security. So I get a lot of satisfaction out of ultimately deploying systems that work to the benefit of Canadian citizens, which is kind of funny, I guess, to work outside of government, but to still be able to make a linkage to that. But I really do, and I enjoy working with them for those reasons. Anyways, that's what I do on a day-to-day basis when I'm not chatting with you on your podcast, Ramsey.
Oh, you do that often, I guess. So how long have you been doing this?
I guess that if we look back a little, I did consulting work as an independent consultant, working for government for, 5 or 7 years in my career. So that would put us back close to 20 years now. And then I shifted over from consulting one-on-one or consulting in conjunction with a company, like I consulted through a number of the professional services arms and a couple system integrators. I eventually transitioned over to doing pre-sales engineering and consulting, because those kind of went hand in hand. You do a little consulting, a little pre-sales, into a full system engineering as kind of a main profession. And probably made that transition somewhere around 2007, 2008. So I guess that'd be about 10 years now. I've been the 80 or 90% of my day was spent, doing system design, system engineering, solution architecture, whatever term you prefer for what we do.
So you've been working with customers for close to 20 years, and specifically as a pre-sales engineer for a little bit over 10 years.
That sounds about right.
All right. So you've been doing it for a while, if I can summarize like that.
You make me sound old. Maybe I am old.
You don't look a day over, 41.
20 25. How's that now?
45? All right. Okay. Is that your age, or you don't look a day
for all
older?
your viewers. There's a few gray hairs here,
Okay.
but I'm not ready to retire yet. I've still got quite a few years ahead of me.
Okay, good. Well, it seems since you've been doing it for a while, it seems like you're enjoying it. And, we talked about this a little bit earlier. You've worked with other SEs, you've helped mentor SEs, and you've been mentored by SEs.
Yeah, I really do enjoy it, and you're right. I've had the opportunity to do some mentoring and to be mentored, you're absolutely right. I've had those chances throughout my career.
So, did you enjoy being mentored?
Yes and no. Mentoring can be very intimidating. So that whole prospect of being a mentor and essentially admitting that you are somewhat incompetent and have lots to learn in front of a senior practitioner is quite a daunting thing. And I have never found that process of asking to be mentored to be particularly comfortable. But when mentoring works really well, I have found it to be awfully rewarding. So when we get past the initial awkwardness and move into a trusted relationship with advice giving, I have found mentoring to be extremely rewarding, both as a recipient of mentoring and as a giver of mentoring, I guess mentor and mentee, if you like those terms. But yeah, I found it to be quite good once we get past the awkward phase each time.
What are some of the qualities of a good mentor?
Qualities of a good mentor, I think one of the best is if you can find somebody who can approach you where you are at. That's the sign of a really good mentor. Some mentors take the role, I'm going to tell you what I have learned, and that's helpful. But I far prefer, I'm going to tell you what you need to know, or I'm going to help you discover what you need to know, where you're at right now today. And that quality, that curiosity about the mentee, discovering what the mentee needs, what is important to the mentee, that quality of discovery and of learning is really key. And I think a second quality that's really important to a mentor is one who seeks to discover what they can learn from their mentee, essentially moving from a teacher-student relationship to a little bit of a senior and junior colleagues relationship. When you can do that, the idea that you'll each learn something, and in some ways, the things we learn from one another are going to be formal, and we'll know what we're aiming at, and some of them will be surprises. If you can find a mentor who is willing to entertain that level of dialogue with you, you found somebody who's really quite gifted and may have something very special to offer if you can invest the time in the relationship to do that.
And have all your mentors and mentees been co-located with you in the same geographical area, or have they been spread out the universe?
I've done both. I've done remote mentorship and local mentorship. I have always found more success with the local mentoring. The remote mentoring can be quite valuable, but because of its remoteness, you end up needing to schedule time, and it tends to become a more formal relationship. There's nothing wrong with formal relationship, but formal tends to result in agendas and scheduled times, specific outcomes, measurable outcomes. It tends to be you can learn lots and you can get lots of good advice from that, and I don't want to dissuade somebody from pursuing that kind of relationship. But I've always found that my best lessons, either given or received, come unscripted in the moment when we bump into each other at the water cooler and are just talking about what's going on with me right now. And those have always, that's where the most gold comes, for me at least. So I tend to prefer the local ones when I can get them.
The reason I'm asking is because a lot of SEs, including myself, we don't have any local colleagues. So you mentioned that even if it's not local, even if it's geographically separated, it is still useful. And that was my experience while I mentored or was a mentee. And also, it could be a little bit ad hoc where you just call someone up and ask them questions. You are right. It's a little bit different than just bumping around at the water cooler, because at that point you're both taking a break. Whereas if you're calling someone up in the middle and they're in the middle of something, then it's more annoying than helpful.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily annoying, but yeah, it's something you have to be a little careful of because you're not necessarily both in an optimum position to respond to one another at that point. But you're right. Remote remote mentorship. There are organizations that offer formal mentoring programs. Cisco is one of them, and I've worked for others. So I'm participating in a formal mentoring program with remote mentors that and mentees, where you can choose and ask and receive and schedule. Those formal programs tend to be pretty. They tend to be formal, and there's goodness in them. Um, when you don't have access to those, or in situations where you don't want to follow the formal mentoring relationship. And I've had both of those situations where simply we want to do mentoring, but neither of us want to get into the formal relationship, and we're remote. It can make a lot of sense to simply do exactly what you're saying. Call them up, ask their opinion, and really, I'm a big fan of the sneak mentorship, where I find somebody who's I really admire, and I think they do a really good job at what they do, and I just talk to them every chance I get. And mentoring happens informally over time through that, right? And I'm a big fan of that. When you don't have somebody local, but you do have a relationship you can build and leverage with someone remote. If you want to formalize that, great. But if you don't, simply doing exactly what you described, calling them up, talking to them, sending them notes, asking specific questions from time to time. How would you handle this?
Sorry, Wes, got some technical difficulties. Do you mind repeating the last thing you said?
Sure. I think I was just going through the value of when your organization has a formal mentoring program and
Yes.
somebody is remote and you want to take advantage of that, do that.
Yeah.
But don't be afraid to take advantage of informal mentoring opportunities. They can be, you can approach somebody and ask them, or simply just finding someone who you admire, who you think does a really good job, and simply building a relationship with them, and leveraging that relationship to ask, have you seen this before? How could I do this? Uh, I've got I'm in a difficult spot. How can we enhance this? Ask questions. And I'm a big fan of informal mentoring. I think it provides a lot of really neat values. So as long as you've got somebody that you think does a great job, I would, even if you don't approach them formally, even if they're at a distance, I'm tempted to suggest you consider them an informal mentor and just start making it a point to ask them questions from time to time and stoke that relationship, just like you were describing, Ramsey.
So,
That you just keep on building, promoting the relationship, find ways to talk to them, and harvest the little nuggets that come out of their mouths from time to time. I think that can be a very valuable way to move ahead in remote mentoring if there's no one local that you'd like to be mentored by.
so here's a quick tip. This is what I did to find mentors, non-official mentors, like
Mm-hmm.
informal mentors. If I had a question, and when I first joined, everybody had more information than I did, I
Mm-hmm.
would have a list, and for this email, I'd send it to these 3 people. For the next email, I'd send it to another 3 people, and I started figuring out who answers, who doesn't answer, who actually wants to help, who doesn't want to help, and that's how I built my relationship. I didn't ask the same person the questions just because.
That's very clever. I've never thought about doing that on a sheet of paper and writing it down, but informally, I do exactly that. I do ask 2 or 3 people questions, and I start to build a map of where they're strong, where they're weak, where they can provide value, where I can provide them value. Yeah, I absolutely do have a map in my head of my different colleagues and different friends and so forth and what they can contribute. You're absolutely right about
Cool. No one's ever said I'm right. Perfect.
that.
So we informal mentorship seems fairly easy. You just ask a question and some people answer. Why would anyone want to be a formal mentor to anybody? Why are you part of a mentor program?
Well, I think there's kind of 2 or 3 reasons, and a lot of them cluster around the same theme. Um, One of them is kind of, I'll call it give back or pay it forward, or simply improving the team. And I have been mentored by people from time to time. People have found it useful to ask me their opinion, and I feel it's part of my responsibility to give back what others gave to me. Or what a lot of people will say to me in turn is they'll say, "Thank you very much for being a mentor." And I'll tell them I'll give them the pay it forward message. I say, if you learn anything from me in this process, pass it on to someone else who asks you 5 years down the road. So there's a lot of possible answers around that theme, which I find very appealing. A second answer set comes around. I'll be really frank on this. It comes around competitive advantage for my company, right? The stronger my team is, the stronger we are. Frankly, the better outcomes for my company and the better outcomes for me, right? So the more I mentor somebody, the less help they need, the stronger member of the team they are. I'm always essentially trying to build better colleagues for my own advantage and for the company's advantage. So um, if you like that perspective of it enables yourself as well. I can do more as a system engineer when I'm surrounded by strong colleagues than when I choose to keep them weak and be the strongest, right? So that informs my thinking too. Is ideally in a perfect world, if my team develops the way that I hope it does, I will be the weakest member on the team, surrounded by giants. And in that case, fantastic. We're going to have a great year, right? So both of those inform why I act as a mentor.
So not many people want that. Not many people want to be the weakest person on the team, not just because of lack of work, just because everybody else is better. So if you're in that category, like I think all managers should be like that, like right, where they empower their engineers. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was agreeing with you.
So I'm gonna challenge you a little bit on the first portion about the team being strong. I don't know how it works at your company, and I really don't want the details just because this is not specific to a company. But a lot of companies, each SE has its own quota, and they have either 1, 2, or 3 account managers they're trying to serve. So a lot of times when you ask someone to be a mentor for somebody, they don't really like the idea because that's time taken away from selling, from hitting their own quota. Have you noticed that, or what do you think about that?
So I absolutely have noticed that. No, there's no question. There are people who think that way, who feel that way. It's a strong reaction in in the industry. Um, for whatever reason, that has never resonated with me. It, the concept that I am here by myself as a lone ranger has never worked. And I mean, let's face it. We all take vacation, and backups help us. We all get sick. People help us out, right? That concept of better together has always it's just written in my soul, I guess is the best way to say that. And so that idea of I retire my own quota on my own, and anything else that distracts me is a distraction. That is 180 degrees opposite of the way I feel the SE role should be played. I've always felt it should be. I work for my customers' success, and I work and I leverage. My role as a system engineer is to bring the best of my organization to my customer, and that includes informing my organization when it needs to be better and helping my organization be better so that the organization can bring the best to the customer. And that's how I become successful, not by tackling a number and tearing it down, but by making myself and my company so relevant to my customer that the orders just fall from the sky, and retiring the number is an afterthought rather than the primary purpose. I know that that's there'll be a lot of people who will disagree with me on that, and there'll be a lot who won't see it that way at all. That's always how I've been oriented, and it probably, frankly, informs why I'm so willing to be a mentor. I really think that's the core of how I pursue the role, anyways.
Well, that attitude and that thinking is basically a characteristic of leadership. Whether you're a team lead, like officially or not, it just shows you're a leader within your colleagues. And if you're all leaders in the same team, then you're gonna succeed no matter what, because you're all gonna help each other. And from what I see, the person who doesn't want to help anybody, wants to be on his own, is not a leader, and he will never be a leader. Like, even if he wants to get promoted to a management position or whatever, he's basically stuck being an individual contributor for a company.
Yeah, and I can't turn around, Ramsey, and say that I've had more successful years than others have had. Right, my colleagues who take a very laser focused approach to their number are very successful. But what I also want to say is colleagues who don't take a laser focused approach on their numbers and they take the opposite approach are also very successful. Right? I and my colleagues who take that approach, we hit our numbers as regularly as the others. And so I don't think it's a case of you choose one path or the other. In other words, you don't choose financial success as an SE and hitting your metrics, or mentoring. I think both paths can lead to the same goal. And I guess I'm obviously an advocate of one of those two paths, but for those who choose the other path, there's still lots to be gained, even if you're not going to be a mentor. There's still lots to be gained by finding a mentor who's willing to work with you, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And just a quick note, I was talking to a few friends of mine who work for different companies around town, and the way they overcome that is part of their quota is team quota. So part of their commission is team quota. So they have their own portion, and then on top of that, they have a team quota where they have to help each other.
Yeah, for organization or for people who are really money motivated, that may help. I'll be honest, I'm not sure I would. I'm not sure the amount of team versus the amount of individual changes much for me. I think I would continue operating this way.
You're already there. You're already there.
Yeah, I think so.
Right, so how would one go about trying to find a mentor?
Well, there's two ways I would suggest. The first way is, if you've got a formal mentoring program in your organization, to reach out and leverage it. And a lot of organizations have these things. They're not always well trumpeted, but they're often buried in the background somewhere. So I guess my first encouragement would be, do some digging. Find out if there's a formal mentoring program that you can leverage. That doesn't mean just look on your internet site. That also means talking to your colleagues about, do we have formal mentoring programs? If you've got one of those, leverage that. Don't be afraid to use it. That's a great way to start it. The second way is the informal way, and it's simply identifying somebody you'd like to be mentored by, and then working to understand what you're hoping to gain from a relationship with that person, and then work towards that. It can be a little bit sneaky. You just start talking to them and start learning from them, or you can be overt about it. You can say, look, I'd really like to learn this from you, and I don't want to proceed the formal process where we log in at this time and meet at this time, but I'd like to regularly work on these things, these goals with you. And at some points, I've done those where we're not going to follow the formal process, but we're still going to be formal enough to schedule time. And other ones, we've just said, you know what, we sit close enough together, we bump into each other enough that we're just going to do it over the water cooler each time. So essentially, if I was to summarize that, if you've got a formal program, start using the program, take advantage of it. And whether or not you have a formal program, do identify some people that inside or out of your organization, remote or local, that you admire and look up to, and that you think they do a good job. It comes back to that being surrounded by giants. Find the biggest giants you can, and see if you can emulate them, and see if they'll share a few of their secrets with you. I think that's how I've always gone about it.
So I'm going to share an observation that I've have, and I think it works in my company. I don't know if it works in yours. Maybe it's different, and you can let me know. I find the SEs who've been at the company for a long time and excelled for a long time are easy. You can easily convince them, or you don't even need to convince them to be your formal mentor. Whereas those who have been there 3-5 years, and they're a little bit ahead of you, it's easier to just do an informal mentorship where you just talk like the way we're talking right now. Mm-hmm. Just because I feel like it's a responsibility being a mentor for somebody, especially formally, because then their success is tied to you, kind of.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. Being a mentor is remarkably scary. So your mentor that you approach has to be relatively comfortable in their own skin, which I think is where you're getting at with those who have been around a while, are comfortable. They have nothing left to prove in the company. They know they've got a solid track record. They're comfortable in their skin. They feel that it's not a whole lot of risk to take on a mentor, or take on a mentee rather. But a mentor who's uncomfortable or still feeling themselves out, and where they fit, or frankly, who is uncomfortable with whether they're going to meet their quota this year, nervous, essentially. It takes a lot of effort. Much like if you think about taking responsibility for an additional task that is critical to someone else. I mean, a simple, like around the home, it could be, if you were taking, I don't know, if you're, it's probably a bad example for mentoring, but if somebody asks you to take care of their child for a day or an evening, right, and not to make the connection between mentees and children, but rather just, it's kind of the responsibility for growth and development and nurture and all the rest. That can be a big responsibility. It can be perceived as a big responsibility. So that can be nerve-wracking to a mentor. And it was for me for the first few times, I'll admit it. And it still is to a certain extent. So probably walking into that question or into that mentor relationship, as you're approaching a potential mentor, walking in with the understanding that even though they are a giant in your eyes, that they may be quite nervous about letting you down, and about failing to meet your expectations, or failing to provide any value as a mentor. Until they've gotten to the point where they're over that, that can be a hindrance, and being sensitive to that can be quite helpful to encouraging them that it's a worthwhile investment of their time.
If I were to summarize what you just said, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that mentees are like children.
I'm trying to avoid saying that.
Okay. No, I got it. That's just
Yeah, it's not like that at all, but some of the responsibility is a little bit like that
Yeah, no,
as
I
a
get it.
mentor.
I get it. Like, I have children, and I don't trust them with anybody, with a lot of, with just anybody. And
Now, I just couldn't think of a better, were we to do this again, I'll think of a better story
no,
for next
no,
time.
this
But
is good. This is candid because I wouldn't want to I wouldn't want to take care of other people's children as well, just because it's a lot of responsibility, and that's
yeah,
what
I
I
think
felt when I mentored other folks. Like, if he succeeds, then means I did a good job. If he fails, that means like my success is tied to somebody else's success, and that's not a good feeling.
exactly. If they fail, you must have failed somehow.
Yeah.
It is remarkably daunting, and I think it's something that mentees often aren't aware of walking into the relationship, that the person they're asking to be their mentor might be just as scared of this as they are. And just like they're powering past their fear to reach out a hand and ask for help, that other person may be powering past a little bit of fear to grasp the hand and to offer the help. But the great news is, in a really great relationship, you can both benefit, and it can be very, very rewarding.
And you already mentioned this. I guess the best way to become to have a mentor is to do it the sneaky way and just ask questions to people and figure out, build it informally. All right. So, all right, we've talked about this. You've been mentoring people for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody's fallible. So, I believe like I've made mistakes in my career, which I shared with you before the podcast, talking
Yeah,
about giving too many options to the customer or
yeah,
doing the
yeah.
spray and pray. Unless you're infallible, you've made mistakes, correct?
I wish I was infallible, Ramsey, but I'm sad to report that I am human.
You are human.
So
Okay, good to know.
yeah.
Check. Can you share some of the mistakes and like some mistakes where it caused you a deal, or other mistakes that actually you were able to push through and still get the deal in the end? Do you have any examples?
Yeah. So if we tie it specifically to a deal, so a very common mistake for a system engineer, and I've made this one several times. I do my very best, but it's very common for us to omit something, right? So that the original solution that's proposed is missing something that's actually crucial to the final solution, and the customer expected it was there, right? So I've made that mistake a few times. I have omitted licensing. I have omitted, pieces of the solution, whatever. The equipment arrives on site. The budget is fully spent. There is no more money. It's not a case of, oh yeah, I've got an extra bag of money under my desk. Here you go. There's no more money. You have it all, and I still can't do what I want. I've pulled that particular one a few times.
To be clear for the folks listening, your deals are like multi-million dollar deals, right? They're not 100K here, 100K there.
Yeah, typically I would be doing, any deals that I'm working on can range, probably usually $1 million and maybe up to 10 in a single deal. And then we would do several of those. We do multiple of those a year. But yeah, something like that.
So they can't just reach into their back pocket and get you some more money.
No, the process to spend that amount of money is essentially you develop a pretty clear budget up front, and they have to request that budget capital. It gets assigned, and then it goes to the board of directors, et cetera, et cetera. It's all signed off. Everyone dots every I, every T. In the case of Government of Canada, it goes to Treasury Board in some cases, and they only meet so often, a couple times a year. The point is, you can't go back and ask for more very easily. So
how did you overcome that?
Well, there's really, essentially, this is where your team makes a big impact. So the first thing becomes admit that we've got a problem, right? So get the facts on the table very, very quickly to your account manager and to, in my case, I have an engineering lead as well. So admit we've got a technical fail here, right? Engineering has failed to do proper system engineering, and yes, I was the cause of that, or I missed it, or whatever. Get the facts on the table, because that's all coming out anyways. Everyone's going to figure it out pretty soon, so you might as well get it out there and get the help. So first of all, get the facts on the table. Second of all, get help. Usually, by doing that early and quickly, my team has been able to pitch in and help rescue. So there's often an aspect of can we help out? So sometimes in the case of licensing, we can do demo licenses, or we can extend, or we can, sometimes there's things we can do. Oftentimes that team adds a second layer of help, which is they broaden the question, because when you make a mistake, it's easy to hyper focus on the mistake, and it's easy to focus on why you made the mistake. Essentially, the team has been good, and I'm trying to train myself to broaden the focus. Get out of your own navel. Stop gazing at your navel. Stop gazing at the problem. Can we broaden it? For example, sure, we forgot to include that thing. However, this thing over here that we also sold them in the same deal has an extra capability that maybe we can leverage to span the gap until we can solve the problem completely. So broadening the focus, adding extra team members to help you out I don't think we have ever failed in that. Every time I've done that, I think we've come through with a solution that was ultimately acceptable to the customer and acceptable to my organization at the time.
So focus on the solution, worry about learning from that problem after.
Yeah. You always learn, you always get better. I make less mistakes now than I did in the past. But I absolutely do that.
And have you heard of a book called Extreme Leadership?
I have heard of it, but I haven't had the chance to read it yet.
Okay. Well, you should listen to it on Audible if you can. It's
Okay.
It's narrated by the writers, and they are Navy SEALs, so you can tell that they're Navy SEALs by their voice, and it's an experience. But that's a different conversation. But basically, what you were saying, like, admit that you made a mistake and work on a solution. That's pretty much the gist of the book. Own your mistakes and figure out how to solve it later.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's key to understand there's different types of mistakes. I mean, when we're talking about system engineering, it's easy to focus on the technical mistakes and that they impact the deal, not the deal. But there's other types of mistakes too, right? You can make personal mistakes, professional mistakes. Your corporation can make mistakes. So I've had, in many cases, my company has made a mistake. We build a piece of, I know Cisco has absolutely no bugs in the software. It's all perfect all the time, but sometimes we end up in, the corporation has done something. The licensing has been impacted, or the shipping has been impacted, or heaven forbid, the code didn't work quite the way we expected. So those things as well can impact your personal credibility, your professional credibility. They can impact the credibility of your customer, and ultimately they can impact your ability to do your job. So it's important to recognize those as well, and to recognize the kinds of impacts those mistakes can have, and to deal with them in a similar fashion, right? To call them out, to address them, to do your best to prevent them, and to really try and get to the root of the problem and solve it. So I like to expand mistakes more than just the deal itself, right? To think of the other aspects of mistakes you can make and try and recognize them when they happen, wherever they happen.
And how do you explain the mistakes to the customers? Because the customers are always right, and you have to be perfect every time. So when you're imperfect, how do you explain that to a customer in a way that they're still going to buy from you in the future?
Well, so I've realized something is that customers expect perfection, but they don't. But they do recognize that to err is human, and when you put things in a lens, sort of, if you can get them to view the larger picture, it's always been helpful to me. What is IT other than the art of managing of imperfection? We all know all of our technology is imperfect. We all know every system is going to fail. And your customer they're simply, the only reason they're meeting with you and talking to you right now is that they are between priority 1 failures. There will be a P1 failure in the future where their systems will go down, and there have been some in the past. In other words, the person who is angry at you is somebody who has also failed and also dealt with this. So I really try and connect them to say, look at the facts. Here's what happened. Own up to the pieces that are mine, the pieces that are ours, right? And then I really try and put it into the larger context. Say, obviously I'm, resonate with them. I'm unhappy with this, and let's look at the impact to you. Let's look at how we mitigate that. And just, I try and tie it back to just like, we're having a difficult, we are organization, I personally am having a difficult time with you right now. You're going to have difficult times in the future. And just like I'm going to be there for you in the future, I don't know if I ever spell it out quite as directly like this, but just like I'm going to be there for you in the future, I'm hoping you can be there for me now. That our relationship spans beyond just this point in time. And I have found that it's not always easy, but I have found that particular moment where there's a mistake, there's a problem, that I come to bat for you and you come to bat for me, wherever the mistake is, those are some of the, frankly, looking back on them, have been some of the best customer relationship building times that I've ever had. In some ways, a mistake or an error or a failure are and when those things happen, that you charge into the burning building to help your customer despite the fact that it's all on the floor. Those can be some of the greatest opportunities of your career, in my opinion. And so when I have a mentee who comes to me with a problem like that, the first thing I do is I look them in the eyes and I say, high five. This is an opportunity for you. Now let's go figure out how we take that on. And it can be really hard in the moment. I will admit, people have had to pull me up by my bootstraps and tell me this is an opportunity. Wes, you say these are opportunities. Well, now you've created a situation where you get an opportunity. Oh, great. But they can be really good. So that's how I try and do it, Ramsey. I don't know if it's perfect. It's not, but it works relatively well for me.
It also depends on the customer you're working with. Most customers are reasonable people.
They are.
Right? And they want to work with you, and this is basically a test for your relationship.
And, it is, right? And I really try and tie it back to why is the customer angry, right? They're essentially always angry because you have caused them some difficulty, right? And once you can acknowledge and understand for yourself, here's the difficulty I have caused you inadvertently, but I did. Whether that's we missed your deadline, I broke your budget, the product didn't do whatever it was, the email I sent offended you, whatever the mistake is, once you can recognize what the source of the offense is, put yourself in your customer's shoes, understand that, internalize it, maybe take the deliberate step of communicating back, I believe this is how I have, caused you problems. Once you know that, that's the point when you can start making forward progress, because now once you know why they're angry, what the offense is, you also know how you can resolve it, right? The options become pretty clear at that point.
I agree with you. And I wanted to ask you, since you've mentored enough people, do you see a trend of mistakes that SEs do in general, whether they're beginners or advanced?
Yeah, there are some common mistakes, which is really kind of interesting. The one common mistake that I'm not going to spend a lot of time addressing is the technical mistake, the miss. We've talked about it a little bit today, but everyone here understands that's a possibility, right? Everyone listening to this who's a system engineer understands that your professional credibility in doing your job, assessing the requirements, developing the right solution, that's key to this. And the way to get past that is to learn your product really well and to spend time on requirements and be diligent about it. That's really not, so everyone makes those mistakes. I make those mistakes. Of course, my mentees make those mistakes. What I think is a more interesting question are some of the other kinds of mistakes that I see mentees make. One of the big ones comes around a personal and professional mistake that I see many of them make, and it is that they believe that they are too junior to contribute. I see that one really often in mentees, that it comes out in different ways. I don't know what my role on the team is, or uh, I don't feel I can talk to that person, or you have such a better relationship with so and so. Can you ask them this question for me? Or another common one is, I won't do a presentation. I'll get somebody to do the presentation for me. Essentially, I'm too junior to contribute. And that mistake, thinking of oneself as too junior to be on the team to contribute well, that mistake leads to all sorts of funny behaviors, right? It leads to self-imposed walls that can be really challenging for the individual to get past. That's one I see quite commonly. And I think if I was to slice into that one, say, you wouldn't be on this team if we didn't think you could contribute. And the best way, so start contributing. The second thing on that is choose an area of expertise that no one else has and charge into that area. Learn it better than anyone else. Those are two common responses I give. A second mistake I see mentees make all the time is putting too much time in. So investing 80 hours a week, 100 hours a week into their job, just getting stuff done. They're doing training and they're answering customer questions at all hours. And it can lead to burnout. It can lead to all sorts of unsatisfactory home situations. So that's a second one. One piece of advice I give over and over is take time off. Find out find a way to level out at around 40 hours a week. If one week you do 45, okay. If it's an RFP and you do 50 or 60, fine. As long as you don't do it the second week, right? Find a way to balance that. And so we start with that, and then we actually work on what can you get rid of, how can you pass things off, what can you say no to get to that. So two common mistakes I see that aren't exactly technical mistakes made by system engineers, but they're very common. And hopefully, if some of your listeners are falling into either of those traps, I would encourage you to, A, if you can break them on your own, great. But B, those are great topics to work with a mentor on. How to break through your concerns about your ability to contribute to the team, or how your concerns about managing your time, how to not even just managing your time, but how to level out your effort at a reasonable amount for you. Those are two good ones.
For the second one, from what I've seen, one of the reasons this happens is because SEs don't know how to manage their account managers. Where the account managers will have a meeting for every hour of the day during from 8 to 6.
Yep.
And then schedule a POC or a demo for the next day.
Yep.
And the SE just doesn't say anything. And to add to your mistakes, that is one reason why that happens, at least in my experience.
Yeah, that one can happen as well. I'll be honest, in my patch, it tends to happen a little less with the account manager booking and a little more with a combination of the account manager plus customer requests. But yeah, you can very quickly end up with a very full day trying to give your customer great service. Yeah.
So how can you prevent some of these mistakes?
It's I mean, part of it, I'll be honest, Ramsey. I'm not perfect at preventing them. I'm not sure there's a perfect method. There is a little bit of an art to it, though. So in terms of system engineering itself, the technical discipline, there is architectural and system design method. There are formal processes that you can follow through. Some organizations have them. Some organizations don't. But you can find templates and forms, and you can find tools that will help guide you to ask questions of yourself. For example, the tool says, did you include maintenance and support? And you go, oh, shoot, I didn't, right? So you can use tricks and techniques, and you can build your own tool. So there's some things you can do for the piece of your role that is relatively well defined, the solution design process. You can beg and borrow, and you can use some tools to help out with that until it comes naturally. That helps a lot. Um, the other aspect, though, uh, you can't, the other one is to be aware of the traps, right? To watch what your colleagues are doing, and when you find you've fallen into a trap. So you've fallen into the 100 hours a week trap, or you've fallen into the uh, I'm not good enough trap, or there's a few others out there, but it's to be self-aware, to realize that what you're doing doesn't match what your colleagues are doing. And if it doesn't match, if you're not, if the other people in the role are doing things very differently or something, maybe it's time to take a step back and see if you're making an accidental mistake, right? Take a deep breath, review what you're doing, and see if you can, look back on what you're doing to revise it, and then look ahead on how you want to do things. So maybe what I'm doing is working my way around to saying, take a little time to reflect on, take a pause in what you're doing. Reflect on how you've been doing it. Take time to figure out how you want to improve it, and then try again. That kind of reflect, catch up, and refresh yourself, and then sprint ahead again thing. I found it can't necessarily prevent you from making a mistake, but what it can do is it can help you spot mistakes you are making and get you to stop making them for your next sprint. That's helpful.
And that is a perfect spot to move on to the next part of this interview, which
Sure.
I lovingly call the not so fire round, which I couldn't think of another name, and that's what it's called. So
all right.
it's the same questions I ask every guest, and you can take your time answering them.
Sure.
So other than a notebook and a pen, if you use a notebook and a pen, what is an essential tool an SE should be using?
Yeah, I have such a hard time answering that with a single answer, but I'll cheat. I'll give you two answers.
Go ahead.
The first one, and it is your ears. You should be listening all the time. A mentor in my life told me once, as a system engineer, if you don't know what to do, go talk to your customer. Very rapidly, you will know exactly what you need to do by talking to your customer. So, listen, understand, use your ears. That's my kind of trite answer to that. I think it's some of the most valuable advice I've gotten on how to be a system engineer is go and ask and listen. Because you asked the question of tool, and I realize ears aren't exactly a tool, my second answer is a good presenter, a good wireless presenter. I love technology, so when I give a presentation, I love to have a presenter in my hand that I am well equipped, I understand really well, I know how all the buttons work, and that it creates a good impression in front of the customer. Whether I'm doing a room full of hundreds of people, or whether I'm doing a room of 5 or 10. A good wireless presenter is my blanket of protection in a presentation.
By the way, the technical name for the presenter is the clickety-click thing.
Yes. Yeah, I just upgraded mine last week, and I'm very pleased with the new model. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of that little piece of technology.
Do you know what model it is?
I have chosen, for better or worse, the Logitech Spotlight. The reason I like it is that it acts as an air mouse. So when I press the laser pointer button, it doesn't give me a laser pointer anymore. It gives me a highlighted cursor on the screen that I can move around, which allows me to move and highlight things on a TV. And so many of the presentations I'm doing now are happening on a big screen in a boardroom as opposed to on a projector with a screen that a laser works with. This being able to do this really helps out.
That's a very good tip. Thank you. All right. Next question.
Sure.
Is there a book or resource that every SE should be exposed to?
Well, so because I know what's in your not so fire round, I knew you were going to ask this. So there is a book or a resource, and I can't find it. But let me tell you what it is, and I'll tell you why I love it so much, and then I have a few alternative sources for it. Possibly the best resource I have ever been given as a system engineer was a presentation done by a gentleman by the name of Barclay Brown. It was called The Presentation Secrets of Comedians and Stage Performers. And it's all about how to learn how to act in front of an audience. Not just how to deliver content, not how to give a speech, but how to present yourself the way a comedian or a TED presenter or a stage performer presents themselves. In other words, how to entertain people so they will listen to your education. And it was powerfully formative for me, dramatically so. I changed how I give presentations and how I speak to people in groups significantly based on that. You can find reference to that presentation online and Barclay's expertise in it, but I cannot find a PDF or anything of it anywhere. So the best alternatives I have for that are a couple of other sites that do the same, they follow the same philosophy. They look at comedians and stage performers and the techniques and tips that they use to handle an audience so that you can pave the way for your content to be well received. One is called 7comedyhabits.com, so the number 7 and then comedyhabits.com. That's authored by David Nihill. And he actually has a book on the topic. I haven't read his book yet, but you can find it on Amazon. You can find the introduction and conclusion there. I'd encourage your listeners to read it and see if it seems interesting to you, because you can read enough of it to get an idea. And I also found the GenardMethod.com, which is by Gary Genard, Genard method.com. It's another one of these comedian stage performers techniques. So it's not exactly a perfect endorsement. The one I saw was Barclay Brown's, and it was fantastic. But I would encourage your listeners to really understand how TED speakers, comedians, stage performers, how do they handle an audience? What do they do? Tips like, so some of the ones that come back, learn how to walk backwards. Because when you're watching from an audience, a presenter turning and walking away from you is very strange. And while it feels funny to you, the presenter, having them walk backwards while they're speaking to you looks very natural, right? How to handle people who ask awkward questions, how to deliver funny, how to tell stories, right? These are all really key. So ringing endorsement for that concept, and I wish I could find Barclay Brown's original presentation for you. It's phenomenal.
Well, if you do find it, do you mind shipping it my way?
I will absolutely do so. I have failed for a while now looking for it. So
I appreciate you going through that.
Well, it's not just for you. Every 6 to 12 months, I wish I had a PDF of it because somebody asks me, or frankly, I want to review the tips and techniques, and I kick myself in the butt I used to have a copy of it and I lost it, and I kick myself in the butt every few months for losing it. So.
And is it so? It's not a book. It's a kind of a presentation notes or.
Yeah, so Barclay does a workshop, or did a workshop on this, and I participated in the workshop and watched him present it, and I had the slides from it at one point.
Okay.
It was just very, very good.
All right. Maybe I'll reach out to Barclay.
Oh, I've tried, and I would love you to do that, and it's fantastic. And in not that, find other similar resources, because there's quite a bit of good content on how to do that.
Okay. Perfect. Question number 3. Do you have any tips or tricks on time management and task organization?
See, this is where I was hoping that we might run out of time.
You want to skip it?
Well, no. So just the opposite. I have a continual struggle, and so I think what I'm going to do here is the mea culpa. I'm going to admit that this is an area, despite 20 years in system engineering in some way, shape, or form, I continue to struggle with time management. I think for some of the reasons that you mentioned earlier and that I mentioned earlier, my current best method is I keep a task list. And I try and keep the task list digitally because when I write it on paper, I lose the paper. So I try and keep a digital task list, but when I keep a digital task list, then sometimes it moves to the background and then I forget to use it. And so I kind of flip-flop back and forth between paper task lists and digital task lists. I found a really great one for Outlook, but then I changed to a Mac and I can't use the particular software in Mac anymore. So it's an area of struggle. I'm still not happy, but it comes down to I keep a task list. On that task list, I have a marking method to tell me whether I've not started it, whether I have started it, and I just keep working the task list. As I get new emails, I add to my task list and I delete the email or I put the email in a folder so that my inbox is generally pretty clean. And then I put my task list in kind of a priority sequence for today or for tomorrow, and then I start going at it and start striking them off. And that's as good as I get. I'm unhappy with it after 20 years, and it is still the best option I've got.
Do you mind if I give a quick tip which may or may not work for you?
You can try. I've tried so many, I'm willing for anything.
All right. Well, I don't have a task list, but we all have our calendar, and calendar is our Bible, pretty much. And what I do is if I read an email, I just put a time block in my calendar of something that I would need to do to follow up on that email. And even if I email somebody with a question, a lot of times I feel like they don't answer. And if I don't have it in my calendar that I asked them that question and I need to follow up, I forget. So everything that I need to do is in my calendar. And the next step for me is what I'm trying to do is have specific time slots for follow-up, specific time slots for working on demos or whatever, which may be a little bit too much because it changes from day to day and customers may need my help. But that's how I do it today.
Yeah, I kind of like that idea in some ways. In some ways, I wonder how well that will work with my personality. But I see what you're trying to get at there, and there's some really good, that idea of creating a follow-up task, something that I always get around to, some way that I'm reminded so I can't forget it, and I set time aside to follow up on things. I really like that, and I try and do that to some extent with my task lists today. But so I know where you're going. I think it's a good method. I'll give it some thought whether I want to do that in my calendar or not.
The reason I don't like task methods is because I don't have time to look at so many, because we have our calendar and then we have our email, and then if you have the task list and then you have your personal task list. Right.
Listen, if I solve this, I'll come back on and tell you the solution. But after 20 years of, I'm not sure that I'm going to solve it next week.
Yeah, well, no, it's a slow process. So good luck with that. I mean, maybe in another 20 years you'll be back on the podcast
for our next interview when I'm retiring.
Yeah. Hey, how did that work out for you?
Exactly.
So, all right. The final question that I have for you, which you kind of covered it a lot earlier on, but what advice would you give an SE that you feel they don't get from anybody else?
A couple things I've thought about here. So one I've alluded to. So slow down, take the time to develop a plan, write it down, and then execute with precision. And that's kind of the idea of take moments to reflect on what you're doing, catch up with yourself, find out what you're doing that is not good, discard it. The stuff that you're doing that's good, amplify it. Write down what you're going to do so you have a rough idea what your plan is, and then execute. Like don't just have good intentions. Execute. A passionate pursuit of perfection will never be perfect, but passionately trying to be perfect and executing on your plan, and then iterating, trying the site, take time to reflect. That's pretty critical. A second topic I think is critical to system engineers is to become a storyteller. I think in many ways my customers don't buy my solution because it is better. I think they buy my solution because they can see how the solution fits into the broader story that they're telling. That they're weaving in their role. So learn how to tell your customer story. Learn how to tell your story in conjunction with that. Become a chief storyteller is a mantra I live by. Tell stories. Tell your technology in story form. Very powerful.
And that goes.
Yeah. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
I'm just gonna say that goes back to the secrets of the comedians. I have not read that, but from the research I've done about comedians, is that they tell stories. That's what they do for a living.
They really do. And if you take time to watch a TED Talk, you'll find that's exactly what they do. Is they tell stories which make the human brain can understand stories and situations better than they can understand abstract thoughts. Oftentimes, when I explaining a complex technical function, I will tell it in the form of a story. So I'll paint a visual picture, all right, of how these items relate. Often I'll use an analogy to make it happen, and we're always telling the story because when your customer understands the facts as well as you do, they will come to the same conclusions you do in most cases. And that conclusion is often, I need that thing because it does exactly what I need. So I really try and tell the story in a way that they can understand the facts and that it's well comprehensible to them. Very much so.
Is there a TED Talk that you enjoyed more than anything else? I can put it in my show notes as an example for that.
I do not have a good strong reference for that at this point.
Just use TED Talk.
Yeah,
yeah. And for the listeners, go ahead.
I have one other thought on advice for SEs.
Yep, please.
So this is one, I don't know what anyone else has told me, but this is essentially become an internal guidepost for me. And it's essentially making sure that you don't get comfortable, that your work is challenging enough that you know the work needs to challenge you enough that you panic occasionally, that you get scared by your work. And if your work no longer scares you from time to time, that doesn't mean you need to be in fear all the time, but if once in a while you don't go, I have no idea how I'm going to do that thing I was just asked, or how in the world are we going to get through this? If you've become so comfortable in your role that you never ask that question, oh yeah, I know how to do that. Yeah, sure, no problem. I think it's time to move on when your work doesn't challenge you. So my guidepost for myself, when is it time for me to start seeking a new role, is when I find I'm not scared very regularly anymore. And I wish somebody had told me that a little bit earlier. I've discovered over time, and I'd encourage your listeners to think about that as a mark when it's time to consider a transition to something new, is when they're too comfortable in their role, if that makes any sense.
It does, and I agree with you. I'm pretty sure a lot of people would agree with you, but no one ever tells them. Almost everybody tells them to stay in one company.
Well, it's super attractive to stay in your comfort zone, right? You make a lot of money, you retire your quota, you know. But I think ultimately, I would become dead inside and hollow, and just if I was never challenged. So yeah, I wish that's one of those. I don't think people articulate it much, but that to me is something that's a good metric to hold yourself against.
Sounds good, and that's all the questions that I have for you. We've been on the call for over an hour, and I appreciate you being here with me.
Well, I've enjoyed it, Ramsey. I mean, I hope that some little bits and little nuggets are useful to someone out there, especially, mentoring and mistakes. Like, you're going to make mistakes, but they don't have to be crippling if you handle them the right way. Mentors have been, frankly, I'm going to weld the two together. Some of my mentors have been the people that have helped me the most when I've made the big doozies, right? They've given me, here's the technique you should use to recover from this mistake or from that problem or whatever. So I think the two, mistakes and mentors, kind of go hand in hand. And I would encourage everyone to, if you have the opportunity to be a mentor, go for it. If you have the opportunity to be a mentee, or if you think you do, hunt it out and find it, and know that and then leverage those when you make the big mistakes, or even the small ones. Leverage those relationships. That's when they pay the real dividends for you. And I'm hopeful that encourages some of your listeners to try some of those, to try something new in that space.
I'm not going to cheapen this with anything else. Thank you, Wesley. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the time, Ramsey.
Appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
And this brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you guys for listening. I hope it was as informative for you as it was for me. Thank you, Wes, for coming on and sharing your experiences and your mistakes, because not everybody likes to admit that they do mistakes. I specifically like this show because we talked about the mistakes, in addition to the mentoring, but the mistakes part, because I did some of the mistakes that Wes was talking about. And I possibly do them more often than I like to admit. But it's good to hear other people talk about it, because it means I'm not alone in this world doing those mistakes. And now that we discussed it, I'm conscious enough about it to try to stop doing those mistakes. So that's a good thing. I think that's a positive thing. If you guys want to share what you felt, some of the mistakes that you do, you can either do them in the show notes, wethesalesengineers.com/show28. If you're listening to this on LinkedIn or wherever, comment wherever. I'll find a way to answer you, or at least have a conversation, because this is fun. It's good to learn about this stuff. As a final note, I am going to leave on a pretty somber note, unfortunately. Recently, I know a friend of mine was touched by a disease, sickness. And I'm not going to go into the details of what it is and who it is. And it's not him, it's within his family. And I feel like a lot of us know a lot of people who are either sick or have been touched by sickness. So I would like to take the opportunity to just ask you guys to cherish the moments you have with your family today, because you never know what could happen. And also, whether you pray or think positive, or whatever it is that you guys do for your friends who have been touched by sickness, don't forget to do that today and every day. Whether we can help them financially or physically, I think thinking about them positively, praying for them, is the least that we can do. Or at least the least that we should do. So, my thoughts and prayers are with everyone who are sick or have been touched by sickness in their family, and I hope everybody gets better soon. And with that, I got nothing else to say other than thank you guys for listening, and this is Ramsey signing off.